Hello YouTube friends. Welcome everyone. Before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is there. What Sleeps Beneath Wicker Hollow. Chapter 1. The Letter. Abigail Moore had always felt like an intruder in her own life. At 32, she lived in a cramped Brooklyn apartment with plants that never grew and a ceiling that leaked whenever it rained. She illustrated children's books, though she'd never had a child or even a partner who wanted one. Her life had a flat rhythm: coffee, drawing, emails, insomnia, repeat. So when the letter arrived, with its yellowish paper and handwriting that looked like a crow's feet dragging through ink, she assumed it was a prank, but it was real. To Miss Abigail Moore, you are the last surviving blood of Miriam Moore, keeper of the seal, and are thus entitled to the property and duties associated with the Old Manse at 17 Wicker Hollow Lane in the township of Wicker Hollow, Massachusetts. Signed, Enoch Black, Esquire. She Googled Wicker Hollow. One result: a dot on an outdated map. Population, NA. 2 days later, curiosity, boredom, and a sense of obligation had pushed her to rent a car and drive north. Wicker Hollow wasn't a town. It was a memory. The road ended in what once might have been a square, now swallowed by forest. Houses stood crooks like teeth in a broken mouth. Hers, the one at 17, looked like something out of a grim tale. 3 stories, stone foundation, windows like eyes. The door opened before she knocked. Enoch Black looked like he hadn't aged since 1905. Tall, pale, suit too large. His handshake was cold. You came. Good. The house remembers. Abigail followed him inside. The air smelled like burned lavender. Everything was dusty, but arranged, as if someone was still living there. "Where is everyone else?" she asked. "Gone," said Enoch, after the last ringing. She didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. That night, Abigail explored. Upstairs, in a locked room that her new set of keys opened, she found something that changed everything. A book. Thick, wrapped in red cloth, tied with black string. The cover said, Kane's Chronicle. It wasn't printed. It was handwritten, in a sharp script that seemed to cut into the pages. There were drawings, grotesque ones. A man with a bell for a face. Children with too many eyes. A church with no doors. And in every corner of the pages, the symbol, a spiral with teeth. She closed the book. Her hands shook. Then the bell rang. Once, twice, 3 times. But there was no bell tower, and no one else around. And when she looked out the window, the road she came on was gone. Chapter 2. The Faces in the Field. By morning, the forest had moved. Abigail knew it wasn't her imagination. Where there had been open grass behind the house, now there were trees, hundreds, packed close. They pulsed in the windless air like lungs. At night, she heard whispers through the walls, always 3 knocks, always at 3:33 a.m. The book, Kane's Chronicle, began to change. Words moved when she wasn't looking. A new page appeared. A sketch. A woman standing in a circle of salt, surrounded by men with blank faces. Below it, written in red, "The 7th night breaks the seal." She was on night 4. Enoch came back. "You've read it," he said without needing to ask. "What is this place?" Wicker Hollow was founded by the Church of the Waking Mouth. A heresy. They believed that sound could call the old hunger. And Miriam Moore? She was their undoing. She rang the seventh bell and bound Cain in the earth. Her blood sealed the church. Abigail didn't want to be anyone's heir. She wanted to run, but the forest had no end now. GPS gave only static. Her phone died and wouldn't charge again. The book followed her, even when she hid it. That night, she heard voices outside. She peeked through the curtains. Figures, dozens, standing in the cornfield across from the house, all wearing masks, all facing her window, not moving, watching. Then the bell rang again, 4 times. Abigail screamed, but no sound came out. Chapter 3. The Seventh Night. Dawn never came. The sky above Wicker Hollow remained a dull gray, as if the sun had forgotten how to shine. Abigail hadn't slept. She still held the book, though it was tied shut with a ribbon she wove from curtain threads and her own hair, as if that could contain what was inside. The house smelled like disturbed earth. From the basement came an ancient breath, damp, ashy, and organic. Something had moved down there, something untouched by light for generations. Enoch returned again. He carried a burlap sack over his shoulder, a lit lantern, even though it was daytime, and a look of resignation. "Tonight is the 7th night," he said simply. "You can't avoid it. The seal is broken. Cain has already read the book in your dreams. The pit awaits you." "I'm not going down," Abigail whispered. "It's not about choice. It's about blood. You are Miriam's blood. The earth knows it. The flesh knows it. He knows it." She covered her face with trembling hands. "Then tell me what to do. I don't want to die here." Anak set down the sack. Inside, a white tunic stained with red, a handbell, and a ritual knife. "You'll go down, but not as a victim, as a cleric." Abigail stared. "You want me to perform a ritual?" "Not a true one, a false rite. One to fool Cain, to distract what sleeps long enough for us to seal the pit again. There's one chance. Only you can do it." She looked at the tunic. Heavy linen. The blood wasn't makeup. Someone had worn this before. "If I wear that, what do I say?" "The book will give you the words. Not until you're down there. Not until they can mean something." Abigail felt her chest collapse inwards, but she knew. If she did nothing, she'd die. Worse, she wouldn't truly die at all. The descent began at dusk. The trapdoor to the basement opened easily now. The air below was thick. Walls wept moisture. The lantern barely pushed back the dark. Enoch followed with the flame. Each step groaned. The basement had a second door, iron, rusted. Abigail had always avoided it. Now Enoch pushed it open. A tunnel, narrow, carved in bedrock, cold. After a few yards, the walls changed. Symbols appeared, not crosses, but twisted forms, half human, half something else. At the end, a crypt, a circular room, an altar in the center, 7 stone benches. On them, figures, once human, now husks, dressed in black, leather masks, missing limbs, one without a head. They turned their heads toward her. Abigail nearly collapsed. In the center, a pit, no bricks, just a spiral hole in the earth. From it rose a black mist, and beside it stood Cain, taller, thinner, face now a bone mask, eyes like voids. "Welcome, daughter of the Keeper," he intoned. "It has been long since the last rite, but the flesh remembers, and you have been read. Your soul is signed." Abigail raised the book. Her fingers bled from clutching it. She opened it. The words were there, a language she understood without knowing. "Et sanctum est flamma quae devorat, et verbum phytos, etos fauce." The husks began to sway, chanting, whispering. "Et in novissima nocte Aperietur corpus, et cantabit pulvis. The pit quaked. Something stirred, scaled, starved. Cain raised his arms. Chains fell from his sleeves. Bring the soul. The daughter has spoken the chant. One figure rose. Approached Abigail, her grandmother, or what was left. Abby, don't let him win. Abigail sobbed, but kept going. Et cum plenum sit Carmen, cloritur abyssus in sanguine voluntario. She stabbed her palm. Blood sprayed the altar. The pit screamed. Wind exploded upward. Cain howled. Enoch's lantern flared white. Now, he shouted, say the final word. Abigail screamed. Clovis. The pit shrank. A spiral of black meat tried to rise, but her blood burned like salt. Cain fell. Dust. Only dust. The husks crumbled. Silence. The pit sealed. Abigail awoke days later in a rural hospital. Hikers had found her collapsed by a roadside, dehydrated and bleeding. The police searched Wicker Hollow. They found nothing. No town, no houses, just trees and a dry well sealed with stone. Abigail never illustrated again, moved far away, but sometimes in her dreams she hears the bells. 1, 2, 3. And every time she wakes up with blood under her nails and the black book on her nightstand. Chapter 1. The Arrival. Caleb had never heard of Ashford Hollow before. It was one of those small towns in rural America, hidden between hills and forests, almost forgotten by time and the world. But when he received the letter from the anonymous sender, inviting him to document the strange phenomena occurring there, he couldn't resist. As he entered the town, a cold wind swept through the streets, although it was midsummer. The houses were old, with peeling paint and cracked windows, and the silence was overwhelming. There were no children playing, no cars driving by, just a heavy, oppressive quiet. The locals eyed him with suspicion, avoiding eye contact. In the only diner open at that hour, Caleb sat down and tried to ask questions, but the answers were vague, full of warnings. Better not stay after dark, an old man whispered. No one sleeps here, not since the bells started ringing. At night, Caleb set up his camera and audio recorder in the room he'd rented. At the stroke of midnight, a strange noise echoed through the town. The sound of an old church bell ringing 4 times, slow and heavy, though the town's church had no bell. Suddenly, shadows danced outside his window. Figures with faceless masks watched him silently. Fear crept into his bones. His recorder captured whispers. They watch, they wait. No one sleeps in Ashford Hollow. Chapter 2. The Inverted Bell Tower. Morning sunlight in Ashford Hollow was deceptive, warm yet unnaturally perfect. Caleb stood before the town's church, an old Victorian wooden building, its bell tower leaning backward, as if pushed away from the sky. Inside the church smelled of old incense and wax. Instead of a traditional altar, a stone circle was etched with strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly. Suddenly, a whisper echoed. "You have entered. You cannot look back." Caleb heard the church bell toll 4 times, though no bell or rope was visible. The air thickened. Light turned blood red. When he tried to leave, night had fallen instantly. Shadows moved behind every window, and a tall, thin, faceless figure floated down the street. The old Dynaman appeared inside the church and revealed the town's dark secret. The founders stopped sleeping in 1881, inviting a cursed presence that trapped souls of those who dared sleep. That night, Caleb struggled to stay awake, drinking a bitter potion that promised alertness, but warned never to take twice. As he fought exhaustion, The faceless figure appeared in his mirror. He shattered the glass and lost consciousness. He awoke in the forest, the town abandoned and ruined. At the church, he met a shadowy version of himself with black eyes, who told him the dream never ends. Chapter 3. The Eternal Dream. The shadow Caleb drifted toward the church, welcoming the real Caleb to the cycle, a curse trapping souls in endless wakefulness and dreaming. Desperate, Caleb returned inside and found an ancient book with a ritual to break the curse, renounce sleep forever, and give his shadow to darkness. He recited the incantation as the bell tolled again. Pain tore through him, his shadow left his body, and everything went black. When he awoke, the town looked alive and restored, but he was alone, his shadow gone. From then on, Caleb became Ashford Hollow's eternal guardian, never sleeping, watching for the next victim. And so it is said, when people nearby cannot sleep and hear the mysterious bell, Caleb waits in the shadows, because nobody sleeps in Ashford Hollow. Ever. Chapter 1. The Fog in Hollow Creek. Hollow Creek was a small town lost in the American mountains, a place where the fog seemed never to lift and where time seemed to have stopped decades ago. The few inhabitants lived their usual routine, but among them circulated stories that no one dared to tell aloud. Marcus arrived in town seeking answers. He had heard about Hollow Creek in an old book of paranormal tales and decided to investigate on his own. As soon as he arrived, he felt that something strange hung in the air, a presence that made itself felt without showing. On his first night, while walking through the fog-covered streets, he saw a figure at the edge of the forest, a woman in a white dress, covered with a veil that hid her face. He tried to approach, but the figure disappeared among the trees. The townsfolk warned him not to go near the forest, that there were things there he did not understand. But Marcus, determined, kept investigating and discovered that every disappearance that had occurred in Hollow Creek was related to that forest and a dark presence they called the Whisper. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Fog. Since that night, when Marcus first heard that whisper that seemed to come from the very darkness, nothing was the same in Hollow Creek. Each day that passed, he felt more trapped in an invisible web that the town, with its silence and evasive glances, had woven around him. At dawn, the fog covered the streets like a thick blanket, hiding almost everything from sight. It seemed the town was wrapped in an eternal twilight, where the light resisted entering and the shadow had its own voice. Marcus would wake with the feeling that something invisible watched his every move. His dreams, once peaceful, turned into nightmares where he saw distorted faces or heard laments that became screams and then vanished into a sepulchral silence. That morning he decided to leave early to investigate the surroundings, especially the forest that surrounded Hollow Creek. According to the legends he had read in the Chronicles book, that forest had been the epicenter of the strange happenings and disappearances. With a heavy coat, a flashlight, and a notebook to write everything down, Marcus walked toward the forest entrance, just behind the old abandoned church that stood at the northern edge of town. The church was covered in vines, and the wooden door looked like it would give way with the wind. However, what caught Marcus's attention most was the rusty cross hanging crookedly on the facade, as if it were a warning sign. Before entering, he noticed strange marks engraved in the stone at the church's threshold. geometric shapes he didn't recognize, combinations of lines and circles that looked more like ritual symbols. Inside, the air was heavy and smelled of dampness and something he couldn't identify, like burnt wax mixed with wet earth. The flashlight's beam barely pierced the gloom, and the floor creaked beneath his boots at every step. On the dusty, cobweb-covered pews, he saw scattered sheets of paper and some old books, probably forgotten for decades. On one of the side altars, he found an open book with yellowed pages where a diary was written in elegant old handwriting. Marcus began to read. It was the diary of a priest who had served in Hollow Creek in the late 19th century. In its pages, the man described in detail how the town had fallen under a kind of curse after the arrival of a strange figure who had desecrated the sacred ground of the forest. According to the priest, that presence, which they called the Whisper, was an entity dwelling in the shadows of the forest and sought souls to torment eternally. The townspeople had tried to stop it with rituals and prayers, but little by little they succumbed, trapped by fear and madness. While Marcus read, a sharp thud echoed somewhere behind him. He turned quickly, but saw nothing. Still, he felt a chill run down his spine. He decided to leave the church and continue exploring the forest. The trail was covered with dry leaves and fallen branches. The wind played with the trees, making their shadows move like dancing ghosts. Every time Marcus advanced, the murmur of the wind seemed to mix with barely audible voices, whispers he couldn't understand, but that raised the hairs on his skin. He reached a clearing where he found remnants of what looked like ancient rituals, circles made of stones, scattered bones, and half-burnt black candles. In the center of the clearing, an improvised altar made of logs and stones showed symbols similar to those engraved on the church. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence. Marcus spun in every direction, searching for the source, but only found the echo of his own pounding heart. He was not alone. In the distance, something moved among the trees, a dark figure that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Aware that he was risking too much, Marcus decided to return to town. That night, while trying to organize his notes in the library, Martha approached him with a worried expression. "You have to be careful, Marcus," she said. "You're not the first to investigate what's here, but many have ended up disappearing, or worse. The Whisper is not just a rumor." "But what exactly is it?" Marcus asked, eager to understand. "We don't know for sure," she replied. "Only that it's a malevolent presence that lurks in the forest and feeds on the fear and despair of the townspeople. Some believe it's the spirit of someone who died cursed. Others think it's an ancient demon." "Why doesn't anyone leave?" Marcus insisted. "Because the town is trapped," she answered, "and because Hollow Creek's history is tied to that presence. If someone leaves, the Whisper grows stronger." In the following days, Marcus kept feeling that presence, that constant watch. Nights were the worst. At home, he heard footsteps on the porch, whispers leaking through the window cracks, and a sensation of being watched that kept him from sleeping. One night, he decided to investigate. Flashlight in hand, he walked through the fog-covered streets. In the Central Park, right where years ago he had seen the veiled woman, he saw a shadow again, vanishing in the mist. He cautiously approached and found an old medallion on the ground. He picked it up and saw a symbol engraved on it, matching the one in the book and the marks on the church. It was a circle intertwined with lines, a design resembling a seal. When he touched the medallion, a wave of cold wrapped him, and he clearly heard the whisper ordering him to leave. But Marcus was determined. He knew that to understand Hollow Creek, he had to face what lurked in its shadows. Slowly he began to notice that his reflection in mirrors didn't always respond the same, that shadows in corners seemed to move on their own, and voices whispered secrets in forgotten tongues. That night, as he wrote in his diary, he felt an invisible hand touch his shoulder. He turned sharply but saw no one, only the thickening darkness closing in, as if the forest had extended its roots inside his house. The reality of Hollow Creek was clear. It was not a dead town, but a place where something dark lived, breathed, and waited. And Marcus knew the true test was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Whisper Revealed. The following weeks were an unstoppable descent into madness for Marcus. Every night was a torment, and every dawn barely a respite, before the darkness devoured what little sanity he had left. The fog that wrapped Hollow Creek not only hid the forest's secrets, but seemed to infiltrate his mind, clouding his thoughts and distorting reality. But Marcus was determined to end it. He had found in the priest's book ancient rituals and symbols promising to seal or banish the dark presence tormenting the town. He knew he would risk everything, but the alternative was living as a prisoner of the shadow-consuming Hollow Creek. One night, under the new moon that barely let the landscape be glimpsed, Marcus left with the medallion in his pocket, the flashlight, and a packet with the ingredients described in the ritual: coarse salt, a rusty dagger he had found in the church, black candles, and an ancient crucifix. The forest awaited him. Crossing the line where the last house disappeared, the fog became almost tangible, dense like a wall. Shadows moved around him, whispering incomprehensible words, twisting into dark figures that seemed to want to trap him. Marcus walked firmly toward the clearing, where he had found the improvised altar days before. In the center, under the flickering light of his flashlight, he began drawing the medallion's symbol on the ground with salt. He placed the candles, forming a circle around it, and with a trembling voice began reciting the ritual's ancient words. The atmosphere turned electric. The air vibrated with dark energy, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath his feet. Suddenly, a shadow emerged from the forest, much more tangible than before. A tall figure, hooded, with bony hands, and eyes glowing like burning coals. "Why do you disturb my rest?" The voice was a whisper that turned into a scream echoing through the forest. "Who are you to challenge me?" Marcus did not hesitate. He raised the crucifix, and with all his might, pronounced the ritual's last phrase. The shadow screamed, a mixture of pain and rage that shook the trees and raised a fierce wind that extinguished the candles and scattered the salt. The medallion shone with a blinding light, and then shattered in his hands. The shadow retreated, slowly fading into the mist. With a sigh, Marcus felt the pressure in his mind ease, the invisible weight he had carried for weeks beginning to fade. Returning to town, he noticed immediate changes. The fog began to clear. Colors seemed brighter, and the whispers disappeared with every step he took. Martha awaited him in the square with a weary smile. "You did it," she said. "Hollow Creek is free, at least for now." But Marcus knew the whisper never truly disappeared. It was a shadow that would always lurk, waiting for a moment of weakness to return. However, that night, As he watched the starry sky from his room window, he could, for the first time in a long time, breathe easy. The town was alive, and though marked by darkness, light had found a door to enter. Shadows in the Valley of Mill Creek. Chapter 1. The House That Shouldn't Have Been There. The town of Mill Creek wasn't on the map, or at least not on any modern map. You could drive through it without realizing it existed, just a sharp curve between forests and a deteriorated sign that read, "Welcome to Mill Creek, founded in 1847. Most didn't even notice it. Most kept going. But Ethan did not. Ethan Collins was not a man who believed in ghosts. He was a photojournalist, skeptical, always chasing reality behind legends, that gray zone between myth and newspaper. He had arrived in Pennsylvania following a rumor, strange disappearances, anomalous electrical activity, and a house that, according to locals, changed shape at night. The house in Mill Creek. He arrived late on a Thursday. It was raining. The sky was gray like wet ash, and the trees leaned in the wind as if trying to whisper something. At the entrance of the town, a gas station that looked abandoned gave him his first chill. Inside, there was no one, but the doorbell rang when he entered, and the light flickered as if someone had just passed by. Ethan consulted the only person he saw on the street, an old woman with a handkerchief on her head who sold candles and flowers in a small stall. "The Harris house?" she asked, with a shaking voice when Ethan inquired. She didn't answer with words. She just raised her trembling hand and pointed toward the forest. "But it's better not to go there," she added. "It is not for you." Ethan smiled politely and thanked her. He didn't believe in curses. The house was on the edge of the creek that gave the town its name. Mill Creek. The locals said that creek never dried up, not even during droughts. Its waters were dark, thick, and gave off a faint sulfur smell. Some said you could hear voices near it at night. Ethan parked his car and approached with his camera in hand. The house, surprisingly well preserved for being abandoned, had a Gothic air. Arched windows, a sloped roof covered in moss, and a crooked porch like a tongue sticking out. There was no mailbox, and the ground was covered in weeds. He entered. He was surprised that the door opened without resistance, and even more so, that there was no dust, no spiders. The floor creaked under his feet, but the air inside didn't smell of mold, but of damp earth and wax. He began taking photos. The rooms were empty, but there were signs that someone had lived there not long ago. A cup on a table, a coat hanging on a hook, a radio turned off but plugged in. Then he found the staircase and the basement. The air downstairs was heavier, almost solid. Each step echoed strangely, as if it didn't bounce back properly. The basement was small, with stone walls, and in the center a wooden chest that seemed older than the house itself. Ethan opened it. Inside, there were old children's toys, a porcelain doll without eyes, a rusty spoon, and a braid of hair tied with a red ribbon. Human hair. He took a photo. Then the radio upstairs turned on. Static. A child's voice. A low laugh. Ethan froze. He went back up with a pounding heart and found the radio crackling on the table. He unplugged it. It kept playing. He grabbed his camera and ran. He didn't see the figure in the mirror, nor the footprints of mud that began to appear behind him. That night, he stayed in the town's only motel. The receptionist, an old woman with a stiff bun and hands stained with cigarette yellow, gave him a key without asking too many questions. "The house called you, didn't it?" she asked as he turned away. Ethan stopped. "What did you say?" "You heard it. That's why you're here. It's always like that. The ones who arrive because something was missing." He didn't answer, but in the middle of the night, he dreamed of the braid of hair and the voice of a girl whispering his name from under the floor. Shadows in the Valley of Mill Creek. Chapter 2. The Town That Doesn't Speak. The next day, Ethan returned to the house. He didn't know why. He had sworn to leave, to report what he had found. But when he opened his eyes that morning, the image of the braid haunted him like a pulse behind his eyelids. The whisper from the dream still echoed in his ears. "Come back." So he returned. The house looked slightly different. The front window was broken, though the day before it hadn't been. The moss on the roof had spread, and the porch planks seemed more warped. Still, he entered. There were children's drawings on the walls now, drawings that hadn't been there the day before. Crayons had traced uneven lines, a house, a stick figure, a river, and a dark stain with arms and teeth. Some drawings had names, but all were crossed out, except one, Ethan. His hand trembled. He continued photographing everything, trying to understand. What was this? A sick prank? A collective hallucination? Had someone sneaked in after him? He reached the room where the chest had been, but it was gone. Now there was a trap door, and from it rose a smell like wet roots and burned hair. In the town, people avoided his eyes. He tried to talk to the mechanic, the grocer, even the postman, but all gave him monosyllabic answers. Some turned their backs on him mid-sentence. Others locked doors as he passed. He entered the library. It was a place buried in dust and silence. An old file drawer contained clippings from local newspapers dating back to 1900. Ethan started reading. Missing children, all aged between 5 and 7, all near the river. One name appeared repeatedly: Amelia Harris, daughter of George and Martha Harris, original owners of the house. Disappeared in 1924. The report mentioned a locked basement and a broken doll. The case was never solved. Months later, George Harris was found drowned in Mill Creek, with his eyes open and his mouth full of mud. Martha was institutionalized after saying her daughter spoke to her from the mirror. The house was abandoned after that, but stories continued. New tenants, similar events, always the same age, always the same signs. Toys moving on their own, water on the stairs, children saying they saw a girl without eyes. Ethan copied the documents. As he left, the librarian stopped him. A woman in her 60s with 2 braids and a cloudy eye. "You've seen her, haven't you?" Ethan hesitated. "The girl?" The librarian nodded slowly. "She doesn't want to be forgotten. That's the worst part. It's not that she wants to leave. She wants to stay. She wants others to remember her, feel her, fear her." Ethan left without saying a word. But that night he dreamed of her again, and this time she had his face. He returned to the house with a flashlight and a recorder. He had to know what was under the trap door. He opened it. A damp tunnel stretched below, earth and stone, carved like an old root cellar. He descended slowly, each step trembling. The walls had symbols, claw marks, names etched with nails. And then he found the room, a round chamber, damp, with a pool of water in the center, and in the pool, the chest. He opened it. Inside was the doll, and the braid, but now the doll had eyes, his eyes. He screamed. When he turned around, there was a child. No face, just a blur of shadow and breath. "Give it back," it said. Ethan stumbled back, climbed the stairs, ran without looking back. He doesn't remember how he got back to the motel. But the next morning, the braid was on his pillow, wet, with one of his teeth wrapped in the ribbon. Shadows in the valley of Mill Creek. Chapter 3. What the Water Remembers. Ethan no longer slept, not because he didn't want to, but because every time he closed his eyes, the girl was there, closer, more defined, as if drawing from his memories to take shape. He began forgetting things, where he parked the car, what time it was, even what day he had arrived. The town seemed to twist with him. The streets now had different names. The houses were in slightly different places. The people didn't recognize him anymore. The old woman from the motel was no longer at the front desk. In her place was a man who didn't blink and only asked, "Did you bring her something?" Ethan left without answering. He walked through the town in the middle of the afternoon, but the light was pale and trembling, as if it didn't want to touch the ground. Mill Creek no longer seemed like a place. It felt like a memory, and not a good one. He returned to the library, desperate, looking for a clue, a way to break the thread that had tied him to that house, that girl, that thing. The librarian was no longer there, but on the main table, someone had left a file. Inside were photos, his, taken with his camera, images from inside the house, the drawings, the chest, the braid. But in each photo, there was a shadow next to him, a child's silhouette, touching his shoulder, looking at him from the corner. He flipped the last page. It was a photo of himself sleeping in the motel with the braid in his hand. The date was that very morning. He dropped everything and ran. But the streets no longer led where they should. Every corner brought him back to the house. He tried to drive away. His car wouldn't start. He tried to call someone. No signal. He screamed for help. Only the wind answered, carrying water vapor and a girl's laugh. That night, he entered the house one last time. Not because he wanted to, because he had no other option. The door opened by itself. Inside, everything was wet. The walls leaked water. The floor creaked like soaked wood. His steps echoed like drops in a well. The trapdoor was already open. He went down without resisting. The tunnel now had lights, lamps of yellow glass that turned on as he passed. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat inside the earth. And the chamber? The chamber was full of dolls, hundreds, all with human hair, all with names stitched into their dresses. One had his name, Ethan. He knelt. The braid was on the altar, floating in a bowl of black water. "What do you want?" he whispered. The girl appeared behind him, now visible, now whole, pale with long black hair and eyes like a blind animal. "To stay," she said. "I don't want to leave, but I need someone to remember, someone to carry me." Ethan cried. He didn't know why. She touched his chest, and he saw. He saw every child she had touched, every mother who had screamed. Every night the house changed shape to attract a soul. He saw the man who built the basement, the priest who tried to bless the place and went mad, the children who left drawings before being forgotten, and he saw himself as a boy, looking into a mirror, and her behind him, smiling. He'd always known. He'd always carried her. She wasn't a ghost. She was a memory that chose a body to inhabit. and now she chose his. They never found Ethan, only his camera, wet, inside the Harris house, now collapsed. The town of Mill Creek no longer appears on any map. Some say it never did, but sometimes on quiet nights in Pennsylvania, you can hear a voice whispering from under the floorboards of abandoned houses. Do you remember me? Route 77, The Hollow Trailer. Chapter 1, Kilometer 434. The road was an endless thread of cracked asphalt that meandered between dry hills and twisted trees, like old men weeping their shadows. Route 77 was one of those roads that the maps barely indicated, with a thin line, almost as if the cartographers had wanted to forget it. It was used mainly by trailers seeking to avoid the interstate checkpoints, or by those who simply had no other choice. That night, the engine of Julian's Kenworth W900 roared loudly against the warm New Mexico desert breeze. The radio was barely picking up static, and the digital clock read 2:17 a.m. Julian was a man tanned by the sun and diesel. 36 years of relentless driving, traveling north and south and back, with no other company than his cigar, his thoughts, and his refrigerated trailer. He transported vacuum-packed meat from Texas to California. A trip like so many, or so he thought. I had heard things about Route 77, stories among trailers at stops, of lights appearing in the rearview mirror and then disappearing, of voices over the radio on closed frequencies, and even of trailers that opened on their own. Old stories, the kind you tell while drinking burnt coffee in a restaurant at 3 o'clock in the morning. But Julian didn't believe in any of that until that night. At kilometer 434, the engine coughed. No, no, no. Julian grunted as his foot instinctively eased off the accelerator. The truck slowed down, but did not stop. The temperature needle blinked for a second, and then returned to normal. Julian frowned, wary. His Kenworth had never failed in 12 years. Then he felt it, a dull thud on the trailer, as if something had crashed from the inside. He looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Another bump, this time harder. The truck shook slightly. What the hell? He said quietly, as he slowed to a stop on the shore. He put on his gloves, grabbed the flashlight from the dashboard, and climbed down. The dry desert wind kicked up fine dust that snuck up his nose. He walked to the back of the trailer, and when he got there, slid the latches. He hesitated a second, then he pulled the doors. The cold of the compartment enveloped him like a slap in the face. Everything seemed in order. The boxes of meat stacked, the metal structure clean with no signs of anything out of place. But then, a puff of mist came out from between the boxes, as if someone was breathing in there. Julian froze. It wasn't steam from the system. It was too human, too dense, like breath in winter. "Hello?" he asked, swallowing his breath. Silence responded. He took a step into the trailer. His flashlight flickered a little, and the light danced on the boxes. And then she saw him. A footprint, a wet mark on the metal floor, as if a bare foot had stepped on ice. And not just any footprint. The toes were long, thin, too long. He stepped back. He closed the doors quickly and locked them. He climbed into the cabin, sweating despite the cold. He didn't say a word. He just started the engine, which luckily responded instantly. He stepped on the accelerator hard, wanting to leave that cursed kilometer behind. But the radio turned itself on. A click, followed by a soft, distant, female voice, like an old recording. Why did you leave me here? Julian gritted his teeth. He hit the radio panel until he turned it off. The sound stopped, but the blow on the trailer returned. This time, it was a long scratch, from the inside, tearing the metal. "Damn it," he shouted, not daring to stop again. For the next 30 kilometers, Julian felt something moving inside the trailer. It couldn't possibly be a person. It was a sealed compartment, refrigerated, with no way for anyone to survive in there. And yet the bumps, the scratches, the footprints, everything pointed to a presence. After 3 a.m., he decided to stop at an old gas station that still used manual pumps. A lonely booth on the edge of the desert. The attendant, an old man with a ragged voice and a dusty hat, offered him a coffee. "Are you coming for the 77th?" asked the man as he filled his glass with foam. "Yes," answered Julian without enthusiasm. "Did something strange happen to you around kilometer 430? Julian looked at him. "How do you know that?" The old man smiled without showing his teeth. "Because no one goes through that stretch without taking something." "Take what away?" "Someone." The old man sipped his coffee. "That part of the road, it's like a hook. It grabs those who have left but don't want to stay dead. He puts them in trailers, in trunks, in empty cabins. They wait for someone to pull them out. And if you ignore them, they get angry." Julian laughed nervously. "Are you saying I picked up a ghost?" The old man shrugged his shoulders. "I just fill up coffee. But if you hear the voice again, don't respond. Never respond." Julian left the station with a more restless soul than before. He climbed into the truck. He checked the trailer locks one more time. Everything seemed locked, airtight. He started the engine. The radio came back on by itself. But this time it wasn't a voice. It was a child's laughter. Light, like that of a child hiding in the closet. A laughter where there should be no one. And then, a whisper. "We're almost there, Dad." The flashlight fell from his hands. The blood drained from his face. He had no children. He never had them. Chapter 2. The Open Trailer. The early morning was enveloping everything like a wet sheet. Julian drove with his eyes wide open and his knuckles tight on the steering wheel. He had forcibly turned off the radio, disconnecting the panel fuses to make sure it wouldn't come back on. But still, he still heard the voice. Not from the radio, no, but inside his head, as if someone was breathing very close to his ear and talking to him from behind, in the tiny space between the back of the seat and the cabin wall. "We're almost there, Dad." The truck roared down the road, devouring kilometers. But no matter how far it went, the GPS kept marking the same coordinate. Kilometer 434. He had traveled almost 50 kilometers from that point, and yet the system insisted. Kilometer 434. Kilometer 434. Kilometer 434. Kilometer 434. "This is a glitch for sure," Julian whispered, trying to convince himself. But as he glanced in the side mirror, his heart skipped a beat. The rear door of the trailer was slightly open, just a little, just a few centimeters, but enough to see that the cold was coming out in the form of fog. And the worst, a small, white hand leaning from inside over the edge of the door, as if someone was peeking in. He slammed on the brakes. The screeching of the tires tore through the silence of the desert. He climbed down from the truck shaking, flashlight in hand, and rounded the back. The right door was moving slowly in the wind. The latch was cracked, as if something had broken it from the inside. "No, it can't be," Julian whispered, breathing heavily. He pushed open both doors, expecting to see the messy meat packages, but no, they were perfectly aligned. Every box in its place, every row as if absolutely nothing had happened. There were no signs of violence, no hands, no footprints, no breath, just a strange detail. On top of one of the boxes, neatly folded, was a small, pink, elephant-patterned baby blanket. Julian took a step back. He had never transported personal belongings, just meat, always meat. How did that blanket get there? He touched it with his fingertips. It was warm, not cold, as it should be inside the refrigerated trailer. Warm, as if someone had used it just a few minutes ago. Then the flashlight flickered. "No, don't turn off," said Julian, tapping her with his fingers. The light returned, and in that instant, he saw her, the girl, sitting on one of the boxes in the background, pale, barefoot, in a threadbare white nightgown. She was no more than 8 years old. Her long, damp hair fell over her face. Her gaze was a bottomless pit. "Dad, why did you leave me?" Julian stumbled backwards, falling on the dry earth. The lantern rolled away, and when he looked again, the girl was gone. Just the blanket, stirred by an interior breeze that made no sense. He slammed the doors shut. The locks were still broken, so he crossed a taut rope from side to side, knotting it with trembling hands. He climbed into the truck, breaking out in a cold sweat. His heart was pounding. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't. At least, I wasn't until that night. At 4:40 a.m., he decided to stop at a transient motel, one of those places that survive on the margins of the map, with half-lit signs and sleepy receptionists. He asked for a room without looking the receptionist in the eye. "How many people?" asked the bored young man. "One. Just me," answered Julian. The receptionist wrote something. Then he raised his head. "So, why are there 2 people getting out of the truck?" Julian turned his head slowly, his stomach cringing, and there it was again. The girl, standing next to the trailer, watching it, motionless. But when he looked a second time, it was gone. "All right, sir." Julian took the key without responding. The room was dark, with an expired bed and a TV that didn't work, but at least it had a hot shower. For a few minutes the water washed away his sweat and fear. He closed his eyes, leaning against the tiled wall. He felt a little more human, but when he came out of the bathroom, he noticed it instantly. The blanket. It was spread out on the bed. The same pink elephant blanket, placed carefully, as if someone had settled in to sleep there. The scream stuck in his throat. "What do you want from me?" he finally shouted, his eyes wild. And then the voice answered. Not from the radio, not from the girl, but from inside her head. An older, more broken voice. "I want you to take me home." That night, he did not sleep. At dawn, he started the truck. He had to go on. He just wanted to deliver the load, get paid, and forget about everything. He passed through a small, dusty town where the sign read, El Vado, New Mexico, founded in 1891. He stopped the truck in front of a roadside diner for coffee. He entered, trembling, with sunken eyes. "What's the matter, friend?" asked the waitress, a short-haired woman with a hard look. "Do you know this area?" asked Julian. She nodded. "Do you know Route 77, kilometer 434? The waitress turned pale. She looked down. What happened there? I saw a little girl. She calls me Daddy. There's something in my trailer. Something that can't be there. The woman approached slowly, as if weighing every word. You're not the first one to see that little girl. They say that 20 years ago a local truck driver left his daughter locked in a refrigerated trailer by mistake. It was the middle of summer. He forgot her for several hours.